A twist on a fairy tale, legend, lore, mythology, or nursery rhyme in order to get your story out in the world. In this 4-part masterclass series, we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know about writing these twisted takes on stories we all grew up with, know, and love, and want to show the world that it really isn't something that we understood in the first place. We're going to be talking about everything from what makes a good retelling to how to avoid copyright infringement to deciding those big twists, all the way to how to edit your stories and how to get them out in the world and what publishing path you may want to take with this. Now, we will be assigning you homework assignments at the end of each episode so that you can practically take steps as we are doing this to make sure you're leveling up your writing and are fully prepared to write your story. So, in between each episode, you're going to have a little bit of work to do. And if you do the work, you're going to get a lot of the heavy lifting on your story done so that you can jump into writing your story at the end of this 4-part masterclass series. Now, make sure that you're following along and taking notes, take screenshots if you need to. And if you have questions at any time, drop those down below because I am the queen of retellings, according to fans. My name is Kim Robinson. I am a multi-time best-selling author, and I have written 1,000,000,001, not really, but almost that many retellings in my life. Everything from twisted takes on Goldilocks as a spy, sent to destroy the Bear family, and Cinderella as an assassin, sent to murder the prince. We have everything from a girl being trapped in the ocean and fighting to get her legs back in a dark Little Mermaid twist, and more. And we're going to help you break down your creative and unique twists. We're going to make sure that you know exactly what you're doing and making sure that you are staying on the up and up with creating your retellings. So, what does make a good retelling? A retelling is going to be a fairy tale, a legend, a lore, a myth, a nursery rhyme, usually those things that we grew up with as children, and we put a dark twist on them. We take things that people already know and already understand inside of their stories that they grew up with, and we're going to show them that they didn't actually know those stories quite as well as they thought they did. So we want to make sure that we are putting big twists on these stories and surprising them. Now we can change up the orders, we can change up the settings, we can change up the characters to create a new version of the story as long as it has some of those original touchstones of the original story so people can easily identify what they remember from those original stories. So let's talk a little bit about retellings. Retellings will have those touchstone elements. So let's think about Cinderella. Cinderella is a story about a girl who is working for her stepmother and her stepsisters, and she just kind of wants a day off. She wants a pretty dress to go to the ball, and she wants to dance at the ball. There she meets the prince, but at the stroke of midnight, she's going to lose all of her pretty decorative things, and so she has to run away from the prince. And as the story continues, we see him searching for her. We see our stepmother and stepsisters trying to thwart the efforts, and eventually the shoe does fit, and we've got our Cinderella story. We kind of know those basic touchstones. Now, keep in mind, you have to be going back to the originals, not the Disney versions of these things, which we'll chat about in a minute. But we want to make sure that we have those touchstones, the things that people understand. Going to the ball, losing the shoe, running away, being found the next day, not recognized, and it's only until the shoe fits that we have this potential ending. So we need to get those worked into the stories in some way, shape, or form, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same thing. I mentioned that I had an Assassin Cinderella story. My Assassin Cinderella goes to the ball not with the intent of dancing or having a pretty dress or potentially marrying a prince, but rather to unalive the prince and his father. I've given her now a reason and a mission to go to the palace, but I've twisted it. The touchstone of going to the ball is still there. People still recognize that act of going to the palace for this big event. However, it is a variation of why she's going there. I've given her a different motive. Now, inside of my story, we know that she's going to run away. In my story, she's running away not because her outfit is about to disappear, but because she is someone who is now a person of interest in this failed assassination attempt, and she has to run in order to survive. The next day, the prince doesn't recognize her. In the original stories, he has to, try the shoes on. He's looking for that girl. In my version, it's because she was wearing a nanobot mask that then left her to protect her when she lost her shoe. It went down her body to form a new shoe so she could run away. But he now has her shoe and he doesn't recognize her because her face is actually different because of the way that the mask, the nanobots, have changed what she looks like. So now she has to work with him to find the would-be assassin, and he doesn't realize it's her. She's still on a mission. We've got these touchstone elements of the shoe, of running away, of not recognizing her the next day, all inside of this story, but it's a twist on it because it's not going to be the exact same thing. So, with that in mind, as you're creating your stories, you want a twist on it. You can take them and put them in a different location or a different time setting. You can gender swap. You can do something where you're going to change it. In my story, instead of a fairy godmother, it's a fairy god brother. It's a guy who's really good with technology and creates all of her wardrobe and technology for going on her assassination missions. So now we've got that twist on it. Same recognizable elements, but a different version. We put that twist on it because remember, who is telling these stories? Whoever is telling the story is the person who won. They get to tell you what the facts of those stories are. Back in the day when I was in elementary school, I read a story about the Three Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf. One of my favorite stories because it shows us that the Big Bad Wolf was not this evil entity trying to destroy the Three Little Pigs, and actually the Three Little Pigs were bullying him. It was swapping what we knew. It turned things on its head, and as a young child, that really impacted me, that we didn't understand what we thought we knew. And we know throughout the course of history, the person who won the war or the battle or the whatever gets to tell the facts of it. Even from country to country, we have different perspectives. It's the same thing that happened because we want to be seen as the victors or as the winning party or as the person who was above the rest of the people. And so we have different perspectives on the same type of event. Whoever wins gets to tell the history books what happened. I use this concept in my Hansel and Gretel's witch retelling, where she's not actually a witch or an evil villain. She was Hansel's secret girlfriend, working with Hansel and young Gretel to sneak little Gretel into the palace to assassinate the Mad King because she's the only one with the magic over life and death. And so my Hansel and Gretel's witch, Annika, is just a very good person working with them who ends up taking the fall and being cast as the witch because the Mad King prevails in this situation. Their plan fails. He tells the story, painting her as something evil. So we get to take those twists on stories and implement them into what we're writing so that people think they know what they knew, but actually realize that they don't. Now, when it comes to creating your stories, you do need to be looking at your originals. You are not looking at the Disney versions. Disney has warped things and prettied things up and changed things. And over the course of the years, books and movies and TV shows have all changed those originals. So, as you're doing research for your story, and no matter what story you're writing, you should always go back to that original source and read the source materials and do your research on it. You want to make sure you're pulling from the originals. When I wrote my Aladdin retelling, I created a steampunk version of Aladdin in a futuristic dystopian society. It's really a very interesting twist. But as I was doing my research, I learned some interesting things. In the original versions of Aladdin, he was a lazy boy who lived with his mother, and there were multiple genies and there was an uncle involved, and like all of the things were very different than the Disney version. And the most significant thing that I discovered was that it's actually a Chinese story, and it was later added to 1001 Arabian Nights or whatever that story was. With all of those different things, it was added into that many, many, many years later and changed, and that's the one we think is the original, but it's not. In doing your research of Mulan, you're going to find that it was an old Chinese ballad. There's two versions of it, and neither of them end very nicely. In fact, most of these stories that we're going to be retelling are very dark and very twisted. And we're all familiar with the Disney versions, which you cannot use because of copyright infringement. And we do not realize just how dark and vicious a lot of these things are. In the original Cinderella story, body parts are taken off to try to fit into the shoe. We have eyes being pecked out by birds in a lot of stories. We have people who have to walk over hot coals. We have a lot of unhappy endings. These are cautionary tales that we've prettied up over the years. So we go back to the original stories and we work in elements of those original stories into what we know and love. But we have to be very careful. We've got to be incredibly careful that we are not dealing with any copyright infringement, because we've seen a lot of things inside of our stories. Oops, I jumped ahead a little bit. We're avoiding that copyright infringement to make sure that we're not stealing from Disney or we're not stealing from another entity, because you can get sued for that, and we don't want to do that. So think of it this way. If you're doing a Little Mermaid retelling, you have the ability to use the Little Mermaid and the Sea Witch, but you don't get to use Ariel or Ursula. Those belong to Disney. You don't get to add in a fish like Flounder or a crab like Sebastian. You don't necessarily get to turn your Sea Witch into an octopus like Disney, because they can sue you for those things. So you have to be incredibly careful of what you're doing and using the source material, the originals, before you are going to be creating your story. So you always want to make sure you do your research on that one. Now, as you're doing your research, you do want to make sure that you're going back to the originals. So you're going to Google things. You're going to go read the original stories. A lot of the things that you will be retelling come from oral tradition. These are old, old, old stories and fables and nursery rhymes and all those things that may not have a specific author. These are all going to be available for you to use, but you're going to have to do some research. You're going to be looking at websites. You're going to Google things. You're going to read stories. You're going to read up on the history of it. You should be putting in at least an hour or two of research before you write a retelling to make sure you get the original plot points worked into your story in some way, shape, or form, and that you're not pulling from a misguided source. Think about the way that we have created these Disney stories, or some of the non-Disney stories that we know and love and grew up with. They have changed them dramatically, and if we lean into their versions of it, it's going to end very, very differently. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to write deep, dark retellings. You don't have to do that. You can have light and fluffy things. You can have those happy endings like Disney does, but you do need to be aware of where these things are coming from before you write them. Now, keep in mind, when it comes to these stories, not everything is up for grabs. So, as you're researching, you also have to realize that there are certain things that are protected under copyright law. There is a very specific year, and that year changes every single year. So, you need to look this up when stories are going to be in or out of copyright. If it's a more recent story, it's protected by copyright and you can't use it. So, for example, you cannot retell the Harry Potter stories because those are protected by copyright law. They belong to the copyright holders of those stories, and if you infringe on their rights, you can and will get sued for that. So you cannot use stories that are more modern. You can use things that are in the past. So anything that started with oral tradition, you're going to be good. That means people told stories around the campfire kind of things. Things that are super, super old, you're good with those. But other stories are going to be available to you. Think along the lines of Jane Austen and how many Pride and Prejudice retellings we have. This is an older story, it's out of copyright, so you're allowed to use these things. Something that recently came out of copyright was Winnie the Pooh. Now, we know that you are able to then use certain Winnie the Pooh stories inside of what you're doing. You can go back to the originals and you can use the characters, but you cannot use the Disney version of the characters because those are still under copyright protection with Disney. So you have to do your research on what you can and cannot use so that you are not infringing on somebody's rights. Just like you don't want somebody stealing your work, other people don't want you stealing their work. So you have to make sure that it really is available for you to use before you're going to use it. Things like fairy tales and legends and lore and nursery rhymes, those are all super old and are available for you to use. But things like Pride and Prejudice, you're going to want to do your research to make sure it is out of copyright. That copyright has expired and has not been renewed, so that you have access to those things before you jump into those stories. So as you're doing this, you want to make sure you're spending a little bit of time and a little bit of effort creating your research, and write things down and take notes as you go, because you want to make sure that you get all those touchstones in as you're writing your stories. Again, you can put them in different versions of this, or in different how you're writing them into your plot, or even in different orders. But you want to make sure that you are putting all those things in, and you want to make sure that you can go back and double check on things. So if you have resources that you used, pop some links into a Word doc just so you can go back and double check things. Make sure you're putting the time and effort into it, because if you don't, you're going to get called out in your reviews, and you don't want that. And you also want to make sure you're strongly avoiding any copyright infringement so that you do not get sued. Now, you want to make sure that you are coming up with interesting twists inside of your stories. We talked a little bit about this. When I'm writing my stories, I will only write stories with big twists. There's a very small subsection of people who will take an original story and flesh it out and call it a retelling. Now, you can do something like that, but you're often going to be called out in the reviews for that, because if you don't do anything new or unique to it, it's not really going to get a lot of people's interest. People come for retellings for big dramatic twists, to see that they did not actually understand the story the way that they thought they were going to understand it or the way they had been raised to understand it. So you need to come up with some type of twist. If you want to just flesh it out, you can, but be very, very aware it's probably not going to sell very well, and you're probably going to get dinged inside of your reviews and in social media as people say this really isn't much of a retelling, it's just kind of an expansion. So you want to make sure that you are developing really strong twists for this. So let's talk a little bit about what I do and what you can do as well. You want to make sure that you are changing some element of it. So if you're not sure what you want to do, I want you to just pause for a second and think, what could be a retelling that I want to do? Now, for me, I like doing the lesser known retellings because they sell better. Goldilocks as a twist is going to sell a lot better than one of 800 million Cinderella twists, right? Because it's a little more unique. So I like to go with unique things and then put unique twists on them. But you can use the common ones as well and start thinking of a twist. So let's think about this. You can pick any story you want. Let's talk about Little Red Riding Hood. I knew I wanted to tell a Little Red Riding Hood story, and I knew some of the elements were really important. The color red, her grandmother, going into the woods to find her grandmother, running into the big bad wolf, bad things happening, defeating the wolf, bringing back grandma. Those are kind of the touchstones, right? The things that people are going to think of and look up when they're looking at your story. So now, how can I change this? It's not about a little girl with bread going into the woods to feed her grandma anymore. Now we're leveling her up. Now I'm dropping her into a different setting. This is how I made my twist on mine. Instead of having her just go off into the woods in some fantasy realm, I turned her into a circus aerialist, which is why she has a signature color. She works for the circus, she's up on the silks all the time, and her grandmother is in charge of new talent. So grandma now goes out into the woods and into the towns and into the cities as this traveling circus is on the road, and she's finding new talent and she's training new people and she's testing things out. So for her to go missing for a little while isn't unexpected, but for her not to come back, now we have a little bit of a problem. So now I have a circus aerialist, and everyone in the circus has their own defined color. Our Red Riding Hood's is, of course, going to be red, and she is up on her silks. And when she comes back down, the ringmaster tells her, "Hey, your grandma didn't come back. We need her back because we got to get going. Go find her." So off into the woods she goes. So now we've got our signature red. She's off into the woods. She's going to find grandmother, and she runs into the wolf who wants to cage her, but not for the reasons you think. I've changed it because I've added that circus element. So now, as we're going into this story, we've got the circus elements, we've got the colors covered. We're good with that. We've got why she might have a cape and why she might have long, flowy red things as she's wearing her different costumes and outfits. We've got her going into the woods, but now we've got her meeting the wolf. And the wolf has multiple twists in here. I don't want to destroy that plot for you, but it's got some twists in there. And the wolf is working with a rival circus. That's as much as I'm going to tell you on that one. But because I have the circus element, now I can get the wolf to get her to this rival circus, to cage her, to force her to do different things within the context of working with this other circus. We've got grandma. We've actually got some elements of that grandma wolf connection in there too. We're looking for a unique twist, and I created this one by dropping her into a different setting. When you take a character and you drop them into a different setting, it impacts the story dramatically. So let's just say you take a character. Let's say you're going to take Sleeping Beauty and you're going to drop her into a dystopian future. How might that work? Well, when I created my Sleeping Beauty with a dystopian future setting, what could I do to make her fall asleep and not wake up? I dropped her into a virtual reality video game. I used technology in a dystopian world so that she was awake and active inside of her story and could be a participant in the story while still being asleep in the real world. So in the real world, she's in a chair and she's playing this video game, and her physical body cannot be woken up, which means she could potentially, and that means in the story inside of the virtual reality video game, she's still awake and active and actively participating. She is an absolute queen as she's defeating different horrible things inside of this video game in order to wake up in the real world. I used the setting to determine what she would be doing and how to make her an active participant in her stories. Now you can change your character's job or the setting, the location. You can change the people. I mentioned in my Cinderella version, I had a fairy god brother instead of a fairy godmother. It is a younger guy who's really good with technology and makes all of her outfits and her gear for her assassination attempts. You can change up how you're going to do things. So you're looking for interesting twists. What if? Your question becomes what if? What if Sleeping Beauty did this? And what if Cinderella did this? Or what if this? What if that? You're asking yourself a question, and it could be anything from the way that they do something or their motive for going there. I said my Goldilocks was sent on a mission. She didn't just show up at the bear's house, set up camp, and then run away when they showed up. She was sent there to get information from them in order to destroy them. Give your character a logical motive or reason for being there. I created a Jack Frost retelling where he's the only one that can stop an out of control weather machine. No longer does he control the weather by magic. I've changed it to a sci fi dystopian setting. They're trapped in a bunker, and there's an out of control weather machine that they don't realize is controlling their weather to test them to form a stronger nation. They have to figure out that there's something controlling their weather and something is out of sync with this, and they have to stop it before it destroys them all. So I've taken it and put it in a new setting. I've given them new motives. I've taken away magic or I've added magic back in. So think about different ways that you could change the story. What happens if you are going to tell a story without magic? What happens if you're going to tell a story with different magic? What happens if you're going to tell a story with technology? What happens if you're going to tell a story something else? I took Goose Girl and I changed her handmaiden that steals her identity into an animatronic artificially intelligent robot. And this robot, this technology is going to steal her identity. I changed how that story works. So you're looking for some element that you can change. And I don't want you to change everything. As you're trying to figure this out, pick one thing that you're going to change and see how that impacts everything that's going to happen in this story. You want to find the one thing that's going to change it all. Now, there's going to be a lot of changes and twists that come with the one element you're changing, but you're going to pick something. So right now, I want you to pause for a second and I want you to think, what story do I want to retell? This doesn't have to be the one that you write. Can be practice, but write it down. Write down Aladdin, or write down Mulan, or write down The Little Mermaid, or write down Cinderella, or write down Little Miss Muffet. I love my Little Miss Muffet hacker retelling. You can pick a story, and now you're going to decide one twist. So I want you to decide right now, are you changing a character element? Are you gender swapping a character? Are you changing a location? Are you changing a time period? You could set things way back in the past, or you could set things way in the future. Pick one thing you're changing and now start listing out ways that that's going to change the story. How does that impact what you're going to be doing? You need to figure out what's going to work best for this story and then start to write it. Now, in upcoming episodes, we're going to actually help you flesh this out a little bit, but this is your homework for today. I want you to come up with a potential topic for your ideas for your story. So, who are you going to retell? Whose story are you going to change? Now, what's the one thing that you can change and start thinking about how that then impacts that character's story? Now, if you're not sure, if you don't know, if you just want to practice, an easy one for you to do is Cinderella. So, if you really don't know or you just want to practice first, use Cinderella. Yes, there are lots of Cinderella stories out there, but that also means there's a market for that because people know it so well and they like that transformation and that happily ever after eventually. So we like to see rags to riches. We like to see all these different things. So you can change that however you want. Maybe it's not rags to riches. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're going to swap those points of view. So instead of it being a prince, you're going to make it a princess, and then there's a guy trying to fight for her. Or maybe you're going to do something else entirely. There's lots of ways that you can be changing this. So pick your one and start figuring out what that connection is going to be. Now, in our next episode, we're actually going to work more on brainstorming and character creation. So this is your time to figure out what you want to work on. And if you have to come up with a couple ideas, do that. But in the next episode, we're going to be focusing on one. So you're actually picking the one that you want to write. We're going to talk about how to flesh these things out, how to create effective characters, and how to really make sure you are going to be doing this the best possible way for you. Then in the following episode, we're going to be talking about plotting and making sure that you are getting ready. And then we're going to make sure that you are ready for putting your book out in the world. So we're going to talk about the entire writing process coming up in the next couple of episodes. If you've got questions on this or comments, drop them down below, and stay tuned. Hit the subscribe and notification bell for the next episode in this masterclass series. You do not want to miss out on this, and you can do it with us in real time to make sure that you are getting this exactly how you want to create your retelling to go out into the world. And I'm going to leave you on this thought. A lot of people will say, but don't you want to write original stories? Isn't it kind of cheating to tell a retelling? And I would say that it is actually an elevated form of writing because you are creating a story that is entirely new and entirely unique, with the caveat of having to write 5, 10 random things into your story and make it a cohesive story. You're actually a better, stronger writer for creating retellings because you get that blank slate everybody else does, with the added pressure of now having to write in 1, 2, 10 really weird random things into your story. So it would just be like taking any other author in any other story and saying, now you have to write in a blue cube, and you have to write in a penguin, and you also have to write in 3 different hats and make it all a cohesive story. So writing retellings takes things that people know and love, changes their perspective entirely, and has the added pressure of making sure it's recognizable while being incredibly unique. So if you are writing a retelling, you are elevating what you are doing as an author, and you should be celebrated for your work and your efforts in this. I will see you in our upcoming episode as we help you brainstorm and character create what you are doing inside of your stories.